Hey, how's it going, class? It's Drew. I'm here to talk to you about the methods section of your papers. Before we get started, let me just make a little announcement that some of you got some points taken off on your annotated bibliography assignments because you didn't properly use abbreviations for the journal names. Okay, so make sure you use those standardized abbreviations, italicize the journal name, and just follow the formatting. Only the first word of the title should be capitalized, etc. Okay, so for today's session, we want you to have an idea of how to begin writing your methods section, and then we want you to break up into your groups and your pairs and really focus and use this time wisely to start writing your introduction. So methods are answering the question of how. How do we do what we do? Intro answers the question why, methods answers how. Okay, we want to have sufficient detail written in the third person, meaning a past tense, okay, and consider using subheadings for each outcome measure that you used, especially if you're doing traditional research. This AEP, we're first going to talk about methods from a lens of a traditional research paper, and then next we'll follow up with how to write the methods when you are creating a narrative review. So first, the traditional research paper, it looks like this. We typically begin with a description of our research participants, who participated, okay? Any characteristics that might be useful. Right now, in this particular section, it might be useful to have a table that has the details of your participants. Next is the actual details of your research study. Ideally, the reader should be able to replicate your entire research study based on what you have written there, as long as they have the same equipment and software and etc. And then at the end, the final section should say details on the statistical analyses that were used. For instance, to start out with participants, how many? How did you recruit them? Any interesting characteristics that might be useful for the reader. Here's an example of one of my past papers. How did we recruit them is listed first. The number and characteristics. More characteristics, as in half of them used a wheelchair for primary community ambulation, where half walked. And then I included a table. So it's always useful to include a table of your participants. And here we have that displayed. Here is another example of a nice table that I like. This was from one of the leadership group's previous papers. And here's an example from one of Tom McPoyle's papers of how he wrote the participant characteristics. I put in red the word we because he didn't use third person past tense, but hey, if you're Tom McPoyle, you can do what you want. Here's an example of a flow chart, one of Larissa's older research groups. And I really like how she made a flow chart in her group that kind of showed exactly how the testing was done. It's always useful to include a statement of consent or IRB approval in your methods section. So here's some examples. Participants were recruited in accordance with the IRB number. We certify that proper care was taken. Here's another statement from Regis University. All participants provided written informed consent prior to participation. Another good thing to add in the methods section would be either a diagram, like Larissa's flowchart, or a photo of the procedural setup. I really like this photo. This is from Tom McPoyle's 2017 group, and they published this paper. And just a nice, simple photo. How are they clinically measuring the longitudinal arch angle? That photo speaks volumes, okay? And also for the details, you want to include specific equipment detail, how you collected the data, and your outcome measures. Here's some more photos or figures that were used in other manuscripts. Up here in the corner being two types of AFOs. Down here in the bottom right would be MRI images, MR images of spinal cord damage. Okay, so in this section of the methods, the detail section, make sure you cite any previous literature if you're using a similar or same method. Okay, for example, verbal encouragement was used to facilitate maximum torque production. Okay, or the second one, if you're using a specific software, make sure you put it in parentheses following what you used it for, right? So analysis of this data was performed using MATLAB, and then in parentheses we say the version of MATLAB that we used. Does any data relate, any past literature have on reliability or validity of your measures? How about minimal clinically important differences? If there's that detail, make sure you put that down and cite it in the methods, okay? So here's two examples. Where can you find some of that detail? Well, we'll have that in the next slides here coming up. Consider breaking up your methods into sections. So if you're using imaging, if you're using clinical testing, you can break it up into subheadings to talk about each one individually. And for statistical analyses, I mean, you just want to say what software you used. So SPSS, for example, you want to say the exact statistical analyses that you use. So here was ICCs and Pearson correlations for this particular example, okay? If you have questions on, oh man, I don't know if my clinical outcome measures have reliability, validity information, MCIDs, this type of thing, it's a good idea to take a quick look at rehabmeasures.org to see if that particular outcome measure has been reported on. So, switching gears, what does your methods section look like if you're writing a narrative review? So, first off, I wanted to say that narrative reviews don't always have to have a methods section. But for you all writing a narrative review, we're grading you, so you have to actually include your methods section, okay? What should that look like? Well, it could look like a variety of ways because it's a narrative review, it's not a systematic review, so you don't have to follow a rigid protocol, okay? But just put, for the purposes of these assignments, just put some detail on your data sources that you're using to pull your papers, okay? Some detail on search terms and search strategies. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, some detail on selection criteria. How many, in general, papers did you grab and how many then did you finally end up including? Okay, again, it's not a systematic review, so you're not going to be rigid about everything. But let me show you a few examples just to help ease your mind here. Here's one by Dean Ranking. Okay, he published this paper back in 2007. And let's look at how he broke it down. First, he lists the databases that he's used to collect his data. Okay, he just used 2 databases. Perfect, great. Second, he says searches have included terms such as, and he lists the terms, they might have included others. Okay, he might have actually not used any papers that had the search term tibial artery. He's just given a vague understanding that this is what he kind of used as he was collecting these papers, okay? He limited his search articles to written in English using humans. And he says, well, over the course of 10 years, he's collected 350 articles, but he chose to use 111 articles for this particular narrative review. Some of your narrative reviews might have a total of 10, and that's okay. Some might have in the hundreds. That's okay too. Okay, that depends on your research question, your narrative review question, and how specific you want to get. Okay, now look at this last line. As this is not a systematic review, the intent was not to critically evaluate the evidence, but rather to provide a summary of the literature on exercise-related leg pain to assist the sports physical therapist better in understanding conditions that present as ERLP. Okay, we're going to show you a few more examples, and these are pulled from 3 narrative reviews that I just thought were really, really well written from last year. Okay, here's example 1. Methods, searches included these particular databases here. Search terms, kind of vague, just had a few search terms that we used here. How do we limit our articles? That's how we did. Peer-reviewed, written in English with human subjects. Searches excluded articles published prior to 2013. They arbitrarily used a 5-year window, okay, for this particular narrative review. Okay, they had over 500 titles, but we selected only 5. We honed in on these particular 5 because they were the ones that talked about pain neuroscience education as treatment for fibromyalgia. And then we added a few more based on the etiology and background of fibromyalgia, okay? But they focused on 5. Okay, next. I'm not going to read these next 2 for you, but I'm going to include these in the slides so that you can go back and look and pull that. Use these as a template for your own narrative review methods section, please. Okay, here's another one, and here's an even more detailed one from Peter Mason and Ian Davis. Okay, so what do we want you to do? We want you to have an idea of how to write up a solid draft of your methods. Again, check your AMA formatting. For the traditional group research, here's what I want it to look like. You have your participant details, you have your IRB and consent statements. Okay, then you have the equipment, procedures, outcome measures, details. Finally, you end with statistical analyses. Done. For the narrative review pairs, here's what I want it to look like. You have your details on the databases you used, some general search terms, how you finally selected the articles. Now, obviously, this is going to change as you truly solidify which articles you're going to use. But it's fine. Put something on paper. Final statement should be, as this was not a systematic review, the intent was. Okay, similar to how Dean Ranking wrote his. Okay. For the group research projects, here is your rubric. This is what you should follow, row by row. Okay, make sure you include your in-text citations, your references, and all these features for your methods section. Before you turn it in, check this rubric. For the narrative review pairs, you'll see the rubric is more simplified because it's not as detailed. Okay, again, narrative review pairs. Before you turn in your methods section, check the rubric. So, kind of concluding here, hopefully by this time you will have broken into groups and pairs. You're going to start writing your intro, okay, and then you'll have an idea of how to write your methods section. So please, quietly work together. Remember that next week, next Thursday, Valentine's Day, the intro assignment is due, and then have a plan for the methods